My name is Ashley Turner, and I was the third human being to die on Kepler Station. I didn't stay dead. That's the part of the story people always want to skip to, but you need the beginning first or none of it makes sense. I was 26, a xenobotanist from Butte, Montana, 3 months into the first joint research posting between Earth and the Velkari Concordance. The Velkari were beautiful in the way that ice is beautiful. Pale blue skin, 6 fingers, eyes like frosted glass. They'd been flying between stars for 11,000 years. They had a word, dozhrai, that translated roughly to Deathworld, and they used it the way you'd use a slur for something you pitied more than feared. They'd found 4 Deathworlds in their history. All 4 had killed every scrap of life that ever tried to climb out of the mud. Radiation-blasted rocks, acid oceans, places where gravity itself seemed to hate the idea of anything standing upright. The Velkari had a whole philosophy built around it, that life was fragile, that civilization was a candle flame in a hurricane, that you protected the flame by keeping it far, far away from the storm. Then they met us. Earth wasn't supposed to still have anybody on it. Their scans said 7 ice ages, seismic instability, a thin magnetic field with holes in it big enough to fly a transport through, and an asteroid strike 66 million years ago that should have been the final word. By every model the Concordance had ever built, humanity should not exist. We were a rounding error the universe forgot to erase. So when we said hello, they didn't believe us. They thought we were lying about our own planet to seem more impressive. It took them 4 years of orbital surveys before they admitted Earth was real and we actually lived there. Full-time. On purpose. That's the world I grew up in. The one where aliens looked at my home address like it was a war crime. The station was a joint research post orbiting a moon called Prime, in a system nobody had bothered naming a real name because the Velkari didn't think it mattered. Just numbers. That was another thing about them, they didn't get attached to places. Deathworlders were the ones who got attached. Everyone else understood that stars burn out. I was there to study a fungal network the size of Rhode Island growing under the ice caps, and I was good at my job and I was homesick and I was, for about 11 seconds, extremely dead. It was a hull breach. Not sabotage, just bad luck, a micrometeor doing 40 kilometers a second through a seal that was rated for anything smaller. I was in the wrong module. The alarms didn't even finish their first cycle before the air was gone, and so was I. Commander Ilith Vase, Station Chief, Senior Velkari Officer, 3 centuries old and about as warm as the vacuum outside, told me later that when her team found me they didn't even attempt resuscitation. Not because they were cruel. Because in 11,000 years of Velkari medicine, nobody comes back from full decompression. You don't revive a species that evolved in a garden. You just don't. They wrapped me for transport back to Earth. A courtesy. A body doesn't argue with courtesy. Except I woke up on the transport. I want to be clear that I don't remember dying. Exactly. I remember cold, and I remember a kind of gray nothing, and then I remember a horrible, gasping, full-body reboot. Lungs slamming into motion, heart stuttering back into rhythm, every cell in my body screaming about the 6 minutes of oxygen debt it had just been handed. I threw up. I cried. I asked apparently where my boots were. The Velkari medic on that transport, a young researcher named Seni Zadar who'd never seen a human before, let alone a supposedly dead one, did not scream because I understand their species doesn't really scream, but she made a sound I've never heard from anyone since, human or otherwise. Something between a question and a prayer. Word got back to Commander Vase before we even docked. By the time I was sitting up in the medical bay, wrapped in a thermal blanket, drinking something that tasted like burnt copper and being told it was restorative broth. She was standing in the doorway just looking at me like I'd broken a law of physics in front of witnesses. "You were not breathing," she said. Flat. Not a question. "No, ma'am. For 6 minutes. Give or take. You should not be alive." I remember shrugging, because I was 26 and exhausted and still tasting vacuum, and I said, "Yeah, well, we're kind of built for that." She didn't understand. Not then. It turned out, and the Velkari xenobiologists spent the better part of a year confirming this, because they simply refused to believe it the first 4 times, that the human body has a shutdown and restart sequence baked into it that most spacefaring species had bred, mutated, or evolved out of somewhere in their comfortable, stable, disaster-free planetary histories. Cold shock response. Mammalian dive reflex. A nervous system that, faced with catastrophic failure, doesn't just die, it negotiates. It shuts down non-essential systems, protects the brain, and waits. Waiting for warmth. Waiting for oxygen. Waiting for a chance. We'd built that reflex over millions of years of ice ages, flash floods, falling into freezing rivers, getting buried in avalanches, surviving things that should have been instant, final, and absolute. Our planet never let up long enough for us to get soft. Every single human being walking around Earth was the descendant of an unbroken chain of ancestors who had, at some point, almost died from cold or falling or drowning or hunger and hadn't. The Velkari had 4 Deathworlds in their catalog, and every one of them was a graveyard. We were the 5th Deathworld, and something had crawled out of the mud anyway. Something that, when you tried to kill it the way you'd killed everything else on those other 4 planets, sometimes just didn't die. Not right away. Not without a fight it hadn't even agreed to lose. Commander Vase came to see me again 3 days later. Once I was steady on my feet and the medics had cleared me for light duty. She stood very straight, the way her people did when they were working up to saying something they found uncomfortable. "We assumed," she said, "that a species which survived its own homeworld was an anomaly, a fluke, one data point. And now I have watched a woman's heart stop and restart in the time it takes me to finish a cup of tea, and I no longer believe in flukes." She paused. "We have a saying, dozhrai can kill, the Deathworld takes all. It has always been true. For times it was true. And now," she looked at me the way you'd look at a photograph you didn't understand yet. "Now I wonder what a Deathworld makes when it doesn't take all. When something gets out." I didn't have a clean answer for her. I still don't, not really. But I've thought about it a lot since, on the long transit back through Concordance space, past all their careful, quiet, well-behaved colonies that never had to fight their own planet for the right to exist. And I think the answer is something like this. Every other form of life the Velkari ever met came from a world that let it grow up gently. Ours didn't. Ours tried to kill us at every stage. Ice, fire, flood, hunger, each other, and every time, enough of us clawed back out of the dark to keep going. We didn't evolve into something delicate. We evolved into something that doesn't know how to accept an ending quietly. I'm 31 now. I run the joint xenobotany program on Kepler Station, and I've trained for more human researchers who've each, at one point or another, terrified a Velkari colleague by surviving something a chart said they shouldn't have survived. We've stopped apologizing for it. Commander Vase and I still get tea sometimes, in the observation deck, looking down at Vesaprime's ice fields. Last week she told me the Concordance had quietly updated its threat classifications. Not dozhrai anymore, for us. A new word. It translates more or less to the ones who come back. I think that's about right.